Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Today, we're going to talk about energy medicine. What does that mean? The energy of the body. We know our bodies heal themselves. We've had many people on the show telling us how that happens. But obviously it must be using some special magic powers of some description, which presumably is coming from within, and we're aiding and abetting it. Also, remote healing. It sounds terribly exciting, but in these days, I'm open to anything. So let's have my wonderful guest today, Richard Cumbers, who is going to tell us all about it. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
And it can't be a better show than having two Richards on it for a start. And also two with a limited amount of hair. So
Yep.
that's a good start to the show. So energy medicine and remote healing. Now, I did interview a lady who was doing bioresonance, she called it. And she took a strand of somebody's hair. You posted a piece of hair to her. She tapped on her computer and she was able to diagnose whatever conditions you may have. And then she was able to sort of charge that hair, which remotely affected the person who had been in touch, which sounded absolutely incredible. But we're beginning to learn how we're not necessarily separate from one another, and how water can talk to water, blood can talk to blood, and things like that. So we're really open to all sorts of understandings these days. So maybe you could tell us what you mean by energy medicine and remote healing.
Yeah. Well, I guess my definition of energy medicine would be anything that actually gets people well without drugs or surgery. So you could really call it natural medicine, as opposed to synthetic medicine, which, of course, allopathic medicine, although for acute things, A&E is fantastic. We know they do a brilliant job. For most of things that are chronic, it's a bit of a disaster. Because every single drug has an LD50 rating, which they find out that kills 50% of the animals during the tests, and they scale that rating up for a 80 kilogram human. So every single drug has toxic side effects, and we know that, and they put them on the label.
Well, they don't hide it, do they? Exactly.
And if you look at the TV commercials in the States, they have this lovely, sexy woman coming on talking about all the benefits.
Oh, hello. We've lost the signal a second. Just bear with us one moment as it drops out, as that sexy woman just was going to tell us some very exciting things. And with any luck, Richard will be back in a second. He's in Ireland at the moment, so the connection is...
Yeah,
we're back. We're back.
Yeah.
You got to the point where you had us all with bated breath as you got to this sexy woman who was telling us all the benefits, and then you froze.
So you typically have this wonderful, visage of everything you like. And
yes.
While there's all these things coming up with all the negative side effects, including death and whatever it is. So basically, energy medicine goes back thousands of years. It's really natural medicine. So you could say that essential oils are natural, and therefore it's a lifeblood of the plant. And of course, most of the allopathic drugs were based on things that they found in things like the rainforest, but they couldn't patent them because they were natural. So they take that particular, plant or whatever, put it.
Our internet connection has gone again. This, I hope, will not be interfering with the interview too much. Maybe it's because of the late time of day that we're recording this, and everyone's on.
Yeah, I've just moved my internet link. I'm here in Ireland, Richard. So it's a bit dodgy. I hope it'll be a bit better now.
Yes, I'm sure that the little people are holding the aerial up so we get a good signal.
Yeah, there's a couple of leprechauns and a few elves out there running about doing crazy stuff.
Fantastic.
But so we know that things that are natural, we're natural. So why would we put something synthetic in a natural body? I mean, basically. So you get essential oils, and then you start looking at the human body from an energetic perspective. So, earlier on we were chatting about, most people think we've got 7 chakras, these vortexes of energy that run in the body. 6 are in the body, 1 slightly above, if you like, our head. But the Buddhists show we've got actually 114 of them. I mean,
wow.
In other words, there's multiple layers of energy. There's different etheric bodies. And so each area of the body, for example, will have a frequency band. So if you started to look at, for example, the colon, which is, the large bowel, it's a very low frequency. So if you play a didgeridoo over somebody, which is a very low frequency, say they've got constipation, the chances are they'll probably go to the loo, because
Right.
the didgeridoo via resonance, resonating energy, is um, powering up that meridian which runs at the same resonance. So likewise, if you think of a tuning fork, if I have a tuning fork of say 10 hertz and you have one of 10 hertz, I hit mine and you're not near to me, but yours will resonate. But also the law of harmonics means that double and half the wavelength, it will also resonate. So if I have a 10 hertz tuning fork and you have a 20 and your friend has a 40 and one has 80 and one has 160, 320, likewise, I hit my 10 hertz. Well, the 10 hertz ones will resonate strongly. The 20 hertz one will resonate a bit less strongly. The 40 hertz will, you see what I mean, a bit less.
Yes.
But then we start looking at emotions. So Chinese medicine would say, for example, that the liver is anger, the kidneys are fear, and typically they'll be, and the bladder might be guilt, for example, the lungs are grief, and the heart's joy. Well, everyone knows that the heart's joy, but you go to a hospital and you talk to a doctor and you say, oh, by the way, the kidneys are fear. They look at you like you're covered in pig's blood or something.
Yes.
But he's quite happy that the heart is joy. You see what I mean? So,
well, I mean, so much of heart, that terminology is so prevalent that he probably is not thinking in the same way as perhaps as you would be thinking.
Yeah, but I mean, in other words, everything has a frequency band, and just like we're here now, so I'm talking to you here now. You can't see my voice.
No,
it's going through the airwaves, which is interesting. What are the airwaves? It's been picked up by my computer, banged into zeros and ones, banged out by a little dongle over there up to maybe a
held by elves and pixies.
Yep, you got it. And so all we're actually seeing when we're talking is sound vibrations depicted as zeros and ones from a computer hard disk put onto a screen. That's what we're seeing.
And then reinterpreted our end.
And reinterpreted, absolutely. So for me, I mean, a bit of history. When I was growing up, I was at boarding school in the UK, and my parents worked in Saudi Arabia. So from the age of 13 to 18, I would be, I went to a public school because it was paid for by my father's. He worked for Saudi Arabian Airlines, or Saudia as they were known. So I had 4 months holiday a year, and I'd fly out on my own at 13 to Saudi, to Jeddah, and have a great time. I had sunshine. And of course, I was kind of like a bit of a free spirit. I'd say, oh, Dad, I want to go to India. I want to go. And he'd just write me a ticket. He'd just write me a ticket out. These are the days of when so I would be getting into loads of trouble going all over these places, 13 to 18. And I was super lucky because, in India, I'd see people using Reiki. I'd see people using hands, making spices up. I'd see people sticking great big needles through them and just sitting there like that. And there's no blood. And I think, wow. And so with all this sort of
and the advantage of sticking these needles in?
Well, I guess they obviously weren't into knitting, but I think it was more. I think it was more the fact that they were showing you can do things you think are impossible. That was the thing.
Yes.
So you'd see there was one Indian guy who'd been sitting on a pole, a 20-foot pole, for 5 years. Now, I look at him and go, what on earth would you want to sit on a pole for 25 years? I took 5 years. I got no idea. Another guy had never been to sleep for 20 years. I don't know.
But I mean, okay. I mean, I was thinking, we were talking about the didgeridoo. Heaven forbid anyone went past that bloke with the didgeridoo sitting on a pulver. That pole might be full of something.
Well, I think you're right there. And of course, you wonder how he did that. But in other words, I was lucky to see all these weird things. And I started thinking out of the box because, you came back to the UK or wherever and you told people about this. They just
and we're very stiff upper lip here and by the book.
Exactly. Oh, Richard, you're completely mad. What's the problem? So, so I started looking at this stuff, and then I got into this idea of energy medicine, although I was working in computers to start with. And I kept seeing with the computers that the computer networks were like the human body. So you had a massive hub, be like Spaghetti Junction, the road network, that's the heart, and all the other tributaries coming off, and the smaller one might be the liver. And they had different frequencies, they had different amount of roads coming in. And then I started to literally, things started to happen. I started to fall over things. So I came across someone called Saxton Burr, and he was involved with plants. And what he was doing, he's wiring plants up to electrodes, and then having thought
Torturing
about,
them.
sorry,
Torturing them.
well, you
No,
could, well, I don't think that was his intention, but
no, no.
maybe he
I'm
did.
sorry. I'm sorry. Just that whole notion of wiring. It's watching too many Frankenstein type. You know. Sorry.
The
I
electric
was.
chair movies, yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Um, but so, and he was actually showing you that when he wired up, for example, yogurt in someone's fridge 2,000 miles away, and that person who lived there had the thought he was going to go back and eat the yogurt reacted. And so he did loads of these experiments.
And how did it react? I mean, what would it do?
It would create a massive voltage with the two electrodes in it. In other,
Yes.
in other words, you've got to ask yourself the question, what is consciousness? And and in esoteric circles, they say everything's conscious because everything is actually made out of the same thing. It's all made out of atoms. So
Right.
when we look at atoms, for example, we think, okay, well, you know, there are 75 trillion cells in our body, and each cell has got, I don't know, trillions of atoms in it. And then we think, well, what's an atom? Well, what we've been told at school is that you've got this um, neutron
Nucleus with a.
with an electron going very, very fast. And the electron is 1885 times less mass, but it goes so fast it appears to be solid. And so
Right.
everything appears to be solid. My analogy is, if you looked at one of the old propeller planes they spin it round fast, well, it kind of appears to be everywhere, doesn't it? But if
Yeah.
you put your hand into it, it'll just chop your hand off. So you wouldn't do
Yeah.
it. But you imagine you span that round a million times faster. If you then pushed it, it would be everywhere at the same time, wouldn't it? It's going so
Right.
fast now. So it would appear to be solid.
Mm.
Yeah. Now, when you actually look at some of the research done, which is mind bending, a guy worked out that if you looked at the actual matter in an atom, actual matter, if you took the atoms from every single person on the planet, yeah, they would fit into a sugar cube. Now, so you start thinking, well, if atoms really are total, there's nothing there. There's virtually nothing there. And then you think, well, the world's too small a place. And then someone else says, well, actually, I've worked out I can get everybody in the world standing back to back on the Isle of Wight. Well, the Isle of Wight's only, I don't know.
20 miles by 15 or something.
Yeah. So suddenly the whole concept of what's possible and what's not, you see what I mean? It's a conceptual thing. So I started looking into this, and then I came across the Bob Monroe Institute. And Bob Monroe was an amazing guy who started to have these weird dreams, and he thought he was having hallucinations. He thought he was having a brain hemorrhage. He started going to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, I can't find anything wrong with you. And then he suddenly realized he was actually going out of body. Yeah? And he got together and he created a Bob Monroe Institute, which everyone can check out. He got together with people like Tom Campbell, who wrote the book My Big Toe. And Tom Campbell is a philosopher, and he suggests that actually we're living already in a virtual reality. This is a virtual reality.
Yes.
And postulates, and I think fairly well proves, that if you accepted that, it explains all the laws that we don't know about, explains everything. But what he got together with Bob Monroe was there were three of them, separate locations, and they would agree that they would meet in the dream world, or the astral, whatever you want to call it. Would come back down again in different locations. There'd be someone there to transcribe what they'd seen and heard. And they all met each other, and it all tied up. And they didn't just do it once, did it many times. But again, what I'm trying to get across is the fact that there's a lot of things there that we take for granted, like we all dream. Well, if you don't remember, we dream. And banks use quantum encryption, which is, if you break the code, it breaks, they're using things to do with the quantum world already, even if we don't understand it properly. So the Bob Monroe Institute really was showing you that the actual world we're living in is really a world of information, and therefore could be a virtual reality world. Think of it now. Everyone's got these headsets on. They're all going in virtual reality suits and having an experience. And you look at Japan, for example. The last time I checked it out, something like boys and men and women up to the age of about 35, 43% of them had never had sex because they're living in the computer virtual world. Well, if that's the case, you can see why the actual birth rate for Japan is 1.1 per couple. And that means that Japan is on the way out. You need 2.1 per couple to maintain the status quo. So it does come down to, I mean, for example, 1939, just when the war started, Columbia University announced in the papers that they had worked out that the human body is a radio transmitter receiver, and they proved it. Yeah, 1939. You had a guy called what was his name? Galen Hieronymus in 1949, I think. He had the only patent for a radionics machine. And what he did, he had all these farmers, they had these worms in corn in the fields, and they were destroying the crop. And at the time, they didn't have so much, all the wonderful fertilizers that Monsanto and glyphosates give us. So he found out the destructive frequency for that worm. He broadcast it, and within 3 days, all the worms turned to mush. And there was no pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. So this is all actually in the public realm, but yes, the education system is an indoctrination system.
Just go back, just take me back, because you've just imparted loads of information there and passed over it. You've just said that we're all effectively the BBC. Hello, this is the BBC body service, that we are broadcasting and transmitting service. Just explain what you mean by that.
So in other words, when they talk about things, what's the radio? It's radio radiation, isn't it? It's like you've got a big sign saying on the air. So this comes back to understanding of, I mean, the Chinese would have the 4 element system and the 5 element system. So they'd have earth, water, air, and fire. But back in about 1880, 1887, there was a Michelson-Morley experiment where they wanted to prove the existence of something called ether, which really is the medium that everything is transmitted in. And it's everywhere, and everything is in the ether. You could imagine it like a lake with lumps of ice floating in the lake. Yeah. So it'd be like a goldfish. He's not aware of the water's there, but he's living in the water. And that means that the ether is actually a medium that you can transmit information through. So as Nikola Tesla said, everything is energy, vibration, and frequency, everything. And in bioenergetics, we are quite happy that sound or information creates sound creates light creates matter, roughly speaking. And that means that everything is radiating. So for example, you've got this thing with all those medical interventions they've been given, and people talk about shedding. Well, if you think about it, if you had a Wi-Fi unit, and the further you go away from it, the less the signal is. But the closer to it, the stronger the signal. So again, shedding is about the body radiating a frequency of something that's negative. So if something is positive for you, it's an electron donor, it's something you get energy from. And if it's electron stealer, that frequency is destructive. It will take energy from the body. And by the way, that was known back in 1969. I've got a picture of an intensive care ward in a hospital with a big sign on it saying, anyone who has had any vaccinations in the last 2 weeks must not enter.
So, right, because they're radiating or shedding.
Yeah. In other words, the body is a radiation system. And the University of Columbia, radionics, you take Rupert Sheldrake, for example. He wrote a book, what was it called? The Morphogenic Field. Yeah. And he showed that there's a field of information, which is, if you like, a radiation field that just carries on going out there. We know this because, if you walk into a house for something, you get that feeling, I don't like this. You can't see anything, but you just feel there's something not right.
So radiating, but also receiving.
But also receiving, yes. So it's a two-way situation. And so when you look at what Tesla said, that everything is vibration and frequency, that's why, for example, our colon meridian is vibrating at a lower frequency, and the didgeridoo by resonance, just through the ether, through the air, would actually affect it. Likewise, your thoughts, if they're positive, you're thinking positive about somebody, you can say that if they're intuitive, or if they're more, the higher self is more tuned, they will pick up your thoughts, telepathy.
Hmm.
And in old days, which very likely from the books I've read, that telepathy was another sense that we had. We've just lost the ability to actually use it. But certainly, when you look at
And this is what I find really weird, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, because I often hear, we had these things and now we've lost them. And you would think, why is it that we've lost all the good things that would have made life absolutely wonderful? And it's like walking. Walking we do without thinking. Those people obviously that can walk and not had an accident, whatever. But we walk. You wouldn't sort of suddenly go, do you know what? I've lost the ability to walk. And if we could telepathically talk to one another, how in the earth would you forget to do that over eons of time? Because it would be the most useful thing to be able to walk into a room and go, well, I'm not dealing with you because you're a con man. So that's what I don't understand. And all this sort of being able to go into the astral projection or know the future or remote view, all these things that everyone says, oh yeah, we could do that in the past. And you go, yeah, but if we could do it in the past, I can't see that we would have got rid of it.
Well, I think this is a much bigger question. And of course, when we look about the resets that are done, I mean, good old Klaus Schwab is talking about the next reset now. If you go back to looking at things like Tartaria back before 1840s, there was a very different understanding. There was lots of books about esoteric things, about levitation, astral things that were nicely, removed from the education system. I mean, I think we're just being dumbed down, not just by the fact that we're having GMO foods, bad foods, mass farming. I've got an exam paper from 1896 for, I think it's 13 or 14-year-olds in the English system. And there's Latin, there's French, there's mathematics, there's whatever. And when I got this, I took it, funny enough, in Worthing to a friend of mine who used to go to the Tudor Close pub before it was turned into flats or whatever. And he was the head of the physics department in a big school in Worthing, 2,000 people. And I showed him this exam paper and I said, I'll tell you what, these questions are amazing. Can you take that back to your colleagues and tell me what they think about it? He said, I will. So when he came back a couple of weeks later, he said, they're amazed because they can't do some of these questions. So you've only got to look at the dumbing down of populations. And of course, I think it's always...
But they can still walk. I mean, my point is that we all walk. If you could talk telepathically, even through you being dumbed down, the parent who is teaching the child generation after generation after generation is not going to go, I'm not going to tell you about telepathy. I'm just not going to tell you about, because people, we still walk. It's like we've all learned how to walk. If we knew how to do the telepathy thing, I just can't see that we would have lost that. It just seems very strange. I can see that we could lose a language like Latin because you could stop teaching people that, or not French, or dumb them down intellectually, but not if it's sort of deeply within you. And millions would have to go along with this. At one point, millions would say, we're all going to stop being telepathic. And that would have to go on for a generation or two. So I find that, I mean, I'm open-minded and I'm here to be persuaded, of course, but I just find that because everybody, presumably they walked back then and they haven't lost the ability to walk. And how would you stop a baby from walking?
Well, I think there's certain basic intrinsic things that if you didn't have, you wouldn't survive. So if you couldn't walk and you were stuck, so I think they're more a kind of perhaps a lower frequency thing that's just a natural thing that's totally inbuilt, and you didn't have it, you wouldn't be here. I think some of the other things that are more, you might see them as more a high frequency ability, have been either dumbed down because of the food. We haven't got the right things in the food. I mean, we know, for example, that, 150 years ago, roughly maybe 1 in 10,000 people allegedly had cancer. And now we've got 1 in 3. And they tell us it's genetic. Well, it's not, because that meant 150 years ago, 1 in 3 people would have cancer. So the food supply and if you like, the controllers of this planet obviously have their own agenda. And their agenda, if you look at some of the resets that have been done before, are fairly big. We were chatting before this interview, mentioning about giants. And I said,
Yes.
I've been collecting hundreds of newspaper articles between 1840 and 1930, yeah, all showing you giants, 12-foot giants, 15-foot giants, 200 mummies, 8 foot 6, 9 foot tall. Michael Tellinger in South Africa showing you hearts that are the size of a car. And people have come down from the Johannesburg University, cardiologists who went, oh, he's a fruitcake, and gone, it's a heart, because they can see that, they can see it. So I think the big thing with this is, I mean, I agree with you to an extent that how could we lose these things? But I think we've just lost the ability through actually epigenetics. And this is a big thing that we go through in our remote scans, because when we scan the frequencies of the body, everything has a frequency. So, mercury, aluminium, COVID, everything has a frequency. And so therefore, if you can actually pick up that frequency, you can see, for example, which minerals are missing, which minerals you can't metabolize, which fears you have, because a fear or a particular emotional hang up, again, is a frequency. And it's like emotion, emotion really is energy in motion. And if it's not flowing, it's stagnant. Therefore, you're going to get a different signature. So I just think that when we come back to try and understand, for example, how remote healing would work, for most people, I think it's such a jump. But again, you can't see my voice. You put the radio on, you tune into radio 1, you change the dial, you get radio 2. The aerial's getting every frequency, but your tuning is which one you actually pick up. Yeah.
Yes.
Look at psychics picking up a hanky. How on earth do they do it? How do remote viewers know when they're given a target? I mean, there was a great thing in Germany, because the powers that be spend tens of millions on remote viewers, for example, and they're tapping into this akashic field, the ether, which is like a substance that every single electromagnetic frequency and thought is like imprinted into this ether. And this guy remote viewed an area in Germany during the last war, and he was given a target which he remote viewed, and he said, it looks like a massive submarine, and it looks like it's huge, and it's this big, and it's this. And the powers that be went, he must have got it wrong, because there's no way they could build a submarine that big. And then at the end of the war, they found that they had built submarines that big, and he was spot on with what he saw. So,
right.
So the question is if we accept that back in the 1870s, when they tried to disprove the ether or prove it, there was a Michelson-Morley who did these experiments. Effectively, they came up with some ideas, and they said, oh, well, based on that, it doesn't exist. But obviously, what they were doing was not substantiated properly, and it wasn't done. It was a bit like pasteurization. He fixed every single trial. But now we have germ theory, and we pasteurize everything, heat it up, and destroy all the enzymes in the food. That's one of the problems. I mean, certainly, I know that in Hermetic wisdom or thought, there is something called the law of correspondence. The law of frequency, the law of resonance. So even Freud was showing that if you put, 2 or 3 clocks in your living room with pendulums swinging at different things, eventually they all come back into sync with each other. It's been well known if you take 10, 15, 20 women, and they're all living in the same environment, they all start menstruating at the same time. There are these cycles that you can't see, just like the voice, that are out there. The great thing is that it's a bit like having your phone. A lot of people use the phone all the time, the computer. They haven't got a flying understanding at all how it works, but they know that you're talking to Richard Vobes, and he's in Australia, and I'm in Plymouth. You don't care how it works. I think a lot of this is, once you get into the mode of going, okay, I'll have an open mind, a broad church, I'll start accept, and then you see the results, then you can work backwards and start working out why this is happening.
Right. I mean, I get that. The thing about the phone, You see, I mean, I've got one leg in the analog world and one leg in the digital world, and the leg in the analog world, I used to see record players and typewriters, and I used to think, how does that work? And I could strip it apart and have a look at it. You know, you could go, oh yeah, the needle goes down, the signal must be somehow in the LP, and it going up the needle, and then it eventually comes out. And what makes it turn is these bands, these rubber bands going. It's all very easy. When you deal with that with the phone, it's a huge leap of faith to think, I wonder if anything actually is in there and it's just magic. Because I don't know. You know, I don't know. I can't see it. And the great thing about the analog world is that you can. And you can use your, even though you may never be able to build one, you can go, yeah, I push this button, this lever comes up, there's a line of tape that's saturated in ink. The paper is held here by a roller, clack, and now I've got the letter R for the beginning of my name. And you can work it out. So that makes it easier to accept things because you haven't got that giant leap. But we're having to make these giant leaps now with many people with remote healing and all of this, because we can't see how it works, as you said.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, if you think about what the things we can actually visualize and see, our five senses, 99.99% of everything going on we can't see or understand with our senses. And there was a guy called Ibrahim Karim who wrote a book called Back to a Future for Mankind. His father was the caretaker of the Great Pyramid at Cheops, something I had the luck at 17 to get into at sunrise, and for some reason there was nobody else there at sunrise, and I lay down in the sarcophagus and had one heck of an experience. And yeah, it's quite interesting. But obviously the pyramids and the sacred geometry, the shape of them. And so Ibrahim Karim, in his book Back to a Future of Mankind, he shows there's a big difference between quantity and quality. So my analogy would be, you go and get a train ticket, you want to go from Worthing to Bath, you go and pay your 50 quid or whatever, he gives you a ticket. Now, if you gave that ticket to a left-brain scientist, he'd say, well, we've looked at it and there's a bit of paper and there's some ink in there and that's it. But the fact is there's information imprinted onto that ink. So when you put it in a scanner, it allows you to go to Bath. In other words, the quantity may be the actual fabric of the ticket, but the quality is the information embedded on it. And likewise, when we're talking, if to say anything at all, my larynx and my mouth and my tongue have to make certain shapes. So if you say the word love, hate, you straight away, love, hate, is completely different shape. And yes. So those shapes are creating a sound wave, and the sound waves do create reality. It's a bit like zeros and ones coming off a hard disk,
yes,
creating something. So when you look at cymatics, are you familiar with cymatics?
No, ignorant as anything, me.
So if you get a plate or a bowl of water, whatever, and you put water on it or sand or rice, and what happens, you attach a frequency generator to the plate and you increase the sound wave. But what happens to start with, it all turns to mush. It's just this massive load of mush coming. But when you say hit one of the solfeggio frequencies, like
the what?
432, called solfeggio frequencies, 432 should be a perfect A. Now, we had our orchestral and sound equipment recalibrated to 440 hertz back, I think, after the First World War, which is very interesting because you change the frequency a bit, you change thought and other things. But when you hit 432 hertz, the sand or the water or the rice turns into a beautiful geometric shape. And then as you increase the sound wave further, it gradually turns to mush again. And then when you hit, say, 528 hertz, this even more amazing, intricate sacred geometry appears on the plate, and as it carries on going. And so the analogy from esoteric and maybe hermetic understanding is that every time you want to change your consciousness to get to a different level, you have to go through maybe a certain madness, a certain craziness, fear-based thing to get to the next level. But to get to the next level, often you have to go through something pretty crazy. And you'll often see people who have NDEs, near-death experiences, something traumatic happens to them, everything falls apart, and then suddenly they come to a new understanding, which could be higher. Of course, maybe if you're people that are running, this planet, they are devolving down to a different level because it's all about control. It's all about power. It's all about forcing people to do things rather than generating a good field of energy so that people want to do them.
Let me, whilst you're there, I mean, this might be a little bit of a side thing. What if, as you just mentioned, that people who are controlling, or people who have hate, or people who are negative are down there on that lower spectrum? How is it that those people down in the lower spectrum can have any kind of control on those people on the higher spectrum?
How would they have control on the people in the higher spectrum?
Because if you're up here, even if you're Mr. Average, whatever that is, and you care enough about your fellow man, enough to sort of go, oh, there's a child about to run into the road. No, come back, or somebody's fallen over in the street. You don't know them. 5 minutes ago, you wanted to get in front of them at the post office, but because they've now collapsed outside, suddenly you're all very concerned about them. How is it that those people who are controlling and don't like people and want us all to be depopulated and things like that, and we're led to believe they're all down at the lower spectrum, how is it they've got any, why is it they can grasp us up above? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's obviously easier when you're looking from a higher level down and you've already been there. So if you've been through those frequency bands and you've experienced it, it's a bit like if someone, you get people who say, I know what it's like to be poor. Well, if they've never actually been poor, if they've never mapped that
yes,
experience, it's very hard.
But the ones that are doing the trouble, if they're down here because they are negative and nasty and narcissistic and stuff like that, and they're not up there, how is it that they can control those who've gone up the elevator?
I think it's because, to a large degree, well, my take on it from what I've seen is that the power base for this planet and everything else is not necessarily a human one. And again, history to do with the races, where they come from, how the planets work, how far the sun is away, is it really 93 million, all this sort of thing. In other words, we've been indoctrinated into an education system that is there to control us. And we had a brief chat about this earlier on. I think that they have enough technology and knowledge to actually be able to control people through things like the BBC, the CNN. They own 95% of the world's media. It's easy. They understand from scientists from history that we are a transmitter receiver. In other words, they know the body's hackable since 1939 at least. We've been hackable. And now, of course, with a few other things that are going in there and graphene and whatever, we're immensely hackable if it comes to it. But I just think that they've had control for a long time and they don't want to let it go. But I think everyone has the ability. Everyone has the ability to wake up. And I think everyone is born pretty much with it knowing right from wrong. I mean, it's pretty much they know that. And if they decide to go on the wrong side, well, so be it. It's a materialistic society after all. Everyone's being told.
Yes, I was just thinking that if you're in that higher sphere, even at Mr. Average, you're higher than the people down below. So why are you influenced by them? I guess that's where I was coming with that. That you would think if you're down there with them, you are on the same level and they can control you. But if you're above, you can just kind of go, yeah, I can see your game, mate, but I'm not playing it because I'm up there with compassion and love and. Or even if you're like, sometimes I'm compassionate and sometimes I'm selfish and sometimes, Mr. Average, which we all flit around a bit, I imagine. I just wonder why we can't see if they're down there. Anyway, what I'm a bit more concerned is that we haven't really spoken about what you do and your remote healing and stuff. We've got onto all this esoteric stuff, which I suppose is partly preparing the way for what you do. So that it isn't a huge leap for people to understand. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I've probably gone off track a tiny bit. But yeah, so the idea of doing things remotely, because I was, flying all around these weird countries, seeing things that they took this for being natural. they saw these abilities as natural. Very different understanding in India or China or Hong Kong, from what we see in the West. And I started a company called Pain Genie in, I think, 2008. And this was
Pain Genie.
Pain Genie, yeah.
Yeah.
This was technology, a little device from the space program that the Russians had spent 10, 20, 30 million, I mean, we don't know how much, but a lot of money on, originally to treat cosmonauts during space travel, which we won't go to the fact the moon and whatever, but that was what it was originally developed for. And I realized that this technology was way beyond anything to do with pain, but it was only licensed for pain relief. That was the issue with it. So I got involved with it. And when I started researching it, I was working for a computer company or a merchant bank, funny enough. And I was in charge of kind of their security and their troubleshooting the mainframe computers to keep everything going for the stockbrokers. And they had to be up and all the time. And I used some of their computer power, with, hope they're not listening, to search before the internet was really there and find this technology. And then I managed to track down the only doctor I could find with the device back in 1995 or something, whatever, and was completely blown away with what the effects of it were. So I got involved with it. And then after about 10 years, friends of mine were saying, well, you're talking about it, treating people, you're not really making any money, and you need to earn a living. So I created a company. But the main reason was I had this, amazing moment when I realized that this kind of technology interfacing biofeedback with the body would change consciousness. I realized then we were in a bit of a pickle and we needed to change a few things. But then I started to use certain things like healing blankets. So we have certain blankets you can wrap yourself in and go to a meditative state. And I came across a guy called Jose de Silva, and he had these mind control tapes. Brilliant. And I was listening to them. One day I thought, I've got some people arriving in the morning, and usually most people had pain, or, other people didn't have pain, but in the morning I had 3 people coming with pain. And I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get in this blanket. I'm going to use his control mechanism with this mind control, going down to sort of a different brain state. And I'm going to imagine I've got the device, I'm meeting these people, and I'm treating them before they've turned up.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and it was great because I could really I'd never seen them before, so I was just visualizing a person, rubbing it over, finding a problem, and treating them. It felt really good. Well, lo and behold, later that day, 2 of them called up and cancelled their appointment. And I said, why? They said, well, the pain's gone.
Already better.
Yeah. And I thought, marvellous. So I've lost money.
Yeah.
Because
it's new technology. It's pain in the neck.
And then I
I'm the one suffering, not them.
Yeah. So I realised that this was working, and I then played about with other things. And that's what really got me into this idea of doing things remotely. I came across, radionics, which is actually sending these kind of signals out, these longitudinal waves. Some call them Tesla waves or standing waves, that effectively go through the ether, and they're faster than light. They connect everything. And more, this quantum realm, the quantum electrodynamics understanding, is relating information to matter. So ultimately, information describes everything. For example, I've met you in person, I can see your face, but I'm just seeing information displayed on the screen. You're not really there. But
I really am there.
Okay.
No, I know what you mean.
But the information describes you perfectly.
Yes.
And it can only be you. And likewise, if you had somebody with their date of birth, their name, their address, email address, where they were born, whatever, it can only be that person. Now, it gets a bit wacky, but when you think about what I just said, it's working perfectly because, we can see it. It's only information. You're not really there. And so based on that, we can run what is called a quantum electrodynamic scan that effectively gives us a readout of your entire body. And of course, everything is a field of energy. So therefore, one way to think of this is refraction. So, if you have a swimming pool or the ocean and the sun's coming down, and when it hits the water, it'll refract. at a certain angle.
Angle, yeah.
And in fact, a lot of the esoteric books were calling angels angles. They weren't really angels; they were angles. Anyhow, that's just whatever.
Spelling error.
Yeah. So, for example, if that water was distilled water, the refraction angle of that sunshine or that wave would be a certain angle. If it was salt water,
A different
it'd be a different angle. If I threw mercury into that, it would be a different
Kill
angle.
everyone.
And if I had a way of picking up the response, not only the angle, I could work out at what level the salt was in there, the mercury.
Yes.
If you were paranoid or schizophrenic or you were fear of death or fear of claustrophobia, it has a certain frequency. Now, the Russians and very advanced people for many, many years, and of course, remember, what we believe is scientific and on the BBC and Scientific American is 60 years out of date. It's crazy. So picking up these certain quantum refraction patterns allows us to get a very good readout of the body. And based on that, including things like minerals, we can then work out what you're missing or what you should stop doing. Because one refraction pattern will be from, say, electromagnetic frequencies.
Yes.
So a deck phone, these phones you have in the house that have base stations, some people still have them. There's a lot about.
Are there?
And DECT phone stands for Digital European Cordless Telephone. Yeah. They put out a certain frequency, and they're very harmful for the body. Because when you measure the radiation from them, radiation is measured in microwatts per meter. And we have meters as well that can do it in real time. But they're putting, and the safe level, by the way, Richard, is around about 1 or 0. So different countries have different levels. I think Switzerland had something like 0.2 and Italy had, 10. And of course, America and UK, their safe level was 1,000.
Oh my God, the people being fried together.
Exactly. So, and of course, damage starts at just over 1. But that is a frequency. So our equipment can detect whether it's a DECT phone or, say, your GSM phone, your category 4, or whether it's 5G, because it has a different frequency. So although it's kind of a lot to get your kind of mind round, once you understand this to do with frequency, energy, and vibration, things that you thought were totally impossible are possible, but also explain a lot of what was happening in what they call history, because they've rewritten most of it, or what they explained in myth, because in our view, most of myth is probably real, and most of history is probably myth. And of course, you had loads of people, everyone from people like David Bohm, Rupert Sheldrake, Greg Braden. So many, Bruce Lipton, so many people talking about everything is frequency, energy, and vibration. So really, when we run things like our clinics, it kind of gets expensive for people to come there. They might have to travel to see us, long journeys, stay overnight. We love seeing people, but most things we can accomplish remotely. And what we're trying to do is to get a complete readout of the body, send them lots of information that they can look at or not. We're not scary. We just say, look, this is what we're finding. It's all energy and vibration. So if you do the right thing, this should resolve. It's not people getting white coats, going to the doctor, and he says, oh, Mr. Smith, put your affairs in order because you've got 3 months to live. We're just saying that this is the energy signature, and the chances are you could have ABC. But if you do this and you change this, you'll probably be okay.
You said earlier that you wrapped yourself in one of these healing blankets. And when you first said healing blankets, I thought to myself, I didn't know they got ill. But anyway, you wrapped yourself in this blanket and you imagined the stuff, and people were cancelled. Do you need all the fancy gear? Are we able to? People say we can heal ourselves with our bodies heal themselves. But can we, if our minds are able to sort of transmit positive thoughts out into the ether, are we able to? Like the people who put their Reiki and things like that. Can people do it remotely just without the equipment? Can they just sort of go, okay, Mrs. Jones, 32 Acacia Avenue, in case you're popping in for tea, I will send you healing vibes? Does that? I mean, can people do that? Is that you hear those sort of things, but you need the technical equipment.
No, I think the equipment is a stepping stone to be able to do it without the equipment. But there's lots of people. I mean, I've met lots of people who can do it in the mind.
Mm.
And of course, what most people are not thinking is that when you're having a negative thought about somebody, it is actually affecting that person because it is a signature going out there into the
No
ether.
wonder I get all these headaches. All these people going, "Oh, bloody Vobes, that bloody Vobes." It's like, get off it, get off.
You've got to stop pissing people off, you know.
I know, I must.
So yeah, I think everyone can do it, but again, it's a frequency, and of course, most people are told it's conspiracy theory, it's madness. I mean, there's a breatharian conference on in Ireland coming up, where
Yes.
loads of people are coming, and there's people there who have actually just survived on water. Now, people say, "Oh, you shouldn't go to that because these people are mad." Well, if
Yeah.
they want to do that, I'm quite happy that they can
Well,
do
let's
it.
face it, there was a bloke sitting on a pole for 25 years. You told me people do very strange things. Just going back, just hang on, I've just got to go back to that thing about if you think about someone and it affects them. A lot of people didn't like Hitler. But it did. I mean, I know it got him in the end. Well, we don't know. There may be different stories about all of that.
Yeah.
But certainly over here, I mean, the Germans may have loved him, and he may have had a different history than we've been told. I understand that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people over here, and a lot of people who are being, assassinated and put into camps and various things, whatever happened, they wouldn't have liked him. So, did he suffer as a result of that whilst that campaign was going on, whilst before it supposedly shot himself in a bunker?
Allegedly.
That's what I mean, allegedly before that happened. But all I'm saying is there's a lot of people who say, for example, haven't liked certain prime ministers or presidents or people like that, key figures. Maybe the Chinese have had certain people they didn't like, and there's a lot of them. And if they'd concentrated, well, just get pissed off by somebody, but it doesn't actually seem to have stopped them from doing the bad things. Take certain Russian people who've done nasty things to a lot of people or what have you. If it was that easy, if it was just a matter of a negative thought about a person affects them, it didn't affect these nasty people who have affected us, because more of us are being affected by we could have got rid of the WEF, for example, overnight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a really good point, but I think it's a matter of degree. And so,
Oh, right.
for example, if you've got
Not enough. You're saying it's not enough for us to sit down here and go, Klaus Schwab.
I'm sure there's a lot of people do, but the thing is, let's just take Hitler, right?
Yeah.
And let's not go into the history behind it, because of course that would be another. But you had an awful lot of Germans and other people who actually loved him, and they thought he was great. They said he saved Germany and everything else. So
Right.
again, it's a balancing thing. And
Yeah, there's not that many people who do like Klaus Schwab and Tony Blair and Bill Gates. I mean, take Bill Gates. He should not be walking about, should he? Not many people have, especially in countries where he's done certain experiments and people have dropped down.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that, I mean, again, we talked about the scale of consciousness.
Yes.
Hawking's, it goes from sort of 1 to 1,000. And if you're under 200, that's pretty much service to self. You're not a very nice person. And if you're 120, you could be a genocidal mass murderer. Between 200 and 499, it's intellectual capabilities. 500, 600 is love, and 600 to 1,000 is scales of consciousness. And he wrote that book, I think, Power versus Force. So there are levels that it just means that, you can be a pretty nasty person and everyone doesn't like you. And that can probably hold you into that particular realm of not being a very nice person, as opposed to thinking good things about the 10% that you are doing is good, rather than the 90% you are doing that's wrong. But if that person has a certain makeup, is, got good minerals and everything else, he won't have so many Achilles heels for this stuff to attach to.
Oh, I see.
So
what you're saying is that because the WEF can eat the best and have the best health and all of that, they are protected from all our negative thoughts. Damn it! I thought we'd found the Achilles heel there.
Well, perhaps, I mean, Lynn McTaggart wrote the Field, the Intention Experiment book.
Yeah.
Field, and she showed when a lot of people are thinking in unison good things, especially in unison as opposed to different types, was a massive change.
Right.
transcendental meditation, when people got together to meditate on the Middle East, they know that things got better.
Mm.
There was a great interview with a guy who went to interview one of the lamas in Tibet, and he was asking, and he was very much CNN type of thing,
Mm.
not obviously particularly, I don't know, conscious, but he asked the lama. He said, "Look," he said, "all you guys meditating to save the world and give us a good time." He said, "You're not doing a very good job, are you?"
Mm.
And the lama thought for a minute. He said, "Just imagine what would happen if we weren't doing this."
Well, that's one of those questions, isn't it? I suppose what instead of people then on the 11th of the 11th on Armistice Day, instead of having that minute of silence and thinking about dead people, all that intention of getting all those people together and thinking for that 1 minute, if they had been focused their attention on those living that actually perhaps ought not be living, who've given us so much grief, we could have got rid of them, and then they would be.
Certainly, there were studies out there showing, and of course, the power of belief. So, for example, they had 100 American boys or guys, I think about between 21 and 23, and they put 50 in this group, and they gave them these squeeze balls. Yeah. And before they did the experiment, they measured this group for strength in the hands and general strength, 20 parameters, and the other 50 they did the same. But this 50, they gave these squeeze balls, and for an hour a day, they would just be doing these squeeze balls with their hands, yeah, for an hour, on and off. And the other 50 were told to put their hands flat on the table and imagine they were using the squeeze balls. So at the end of the month, they found that the guys that actually had the squeeze balls had increased their strength by 33%. And the people who'd done nothing had increased the strength by 27%.
Wow.
So again, it's the mind is going, I'm actually doing this.
Yes.
Of course, the understanding that the intention is really critical here. You know, everyone knows the kind of person is very negative. And I remember when I worked in the computers in Haywards Heath, there's one guy I thought was a lovely guy called John. And always he was negative, you know, and I tried to try and cheer him up. And he said, "Oh, I'm got long for this earth, you know, I'm never going to make," and, you know, he was talking his own death. And sure enough, a year later, he died of a heart attack at 52.
Gosh.
But he was always, you know, he was making it happen. He was like taking the future and saying, that's what I'm going to be doing.
And I suppose he didn't really know that's what was going to happen to him. He just felt that was his attitude.
Well, again, it's frequency. So, you know, I said you put 432 hertz through a plate and it comes into this beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So if you beam a certain frequency, I think it's, well, I won't say what it is because, you know, but it's a low frequency. If you beam that at a man, you will very likely make him sexually aggressive because it's a frequency that starts stimulating certain hormones and whatever. So this frequency thing is vital to understand because everything is actually based on a frequency. So like if that propeller is going around very fast at that frequency, it appears to be solid.
Yeah.
And if it went down to minus 273 and everything stopped vibrating, well, according to some people, the entire universe would just disappear.
Well, let's hope it doesn't. Otherwise, it's all been for nothing. We're going to have to come to the end of our slot. But before we come to that end, let me just ask you this question, which has now disappeared from my mind, which is just bloody typical. And I'm trying to grasp it back. Oh yeah, thank you very much. Oh, there it is. I'll just have that back. I mean, we've seen in recent times all this fear mongering from the internet, from the government, from mainstream media. Presumably that's to keep us in this low frequency, which makes us ill, which makes us go to the blokes with white coats and white pills, which just keeps us in that circle of stuff. And what you do, and many other people who I've interviewed who are talking about much more positive and different ways of doing things, is lifting people out of that circle and giving them the power in themselves, even though you're facilitating, to rise above all that and stay healthy. Is that true?
Yeah,
I just,
absolutely. I mean,
it
I think
sounded incredible when I said it. Thank you very much. So where can people get hold of you? And I mean, are you open to people? Are you do run a surgery type thing? And do you heal people? I mean, you mentioned your Pain Genie. Is that still the thing you do?
well, first of all, I should say that I'm not a medical doctor and I don't want to be. So we always say people should always check their health professional. We
Yeah.
do everything energetically. I do run sort of clinics. Nothing's planned at the moment because I'm in Ireland at the moment, but that's why we do so much remote work. And we're very happy that we're pretty sure we're 95% accuracy, and give people a mini training course, give them lots of information. So yes, people can always get in touch with us. You can get in touch through one website called paingenie.com, or one of my emails, which is richard@paingenie.com, or teslahealth@gmail.com.
Don't confuse them. Don't give them too many options.
Okay,
They'll be confused. PainGenie.com is great. Pain.
richard@paingenie.com. Yeah.
Yeah. Genie.
And they're always welcome to call me. There's information on the website there. They can call up the London office and they'll be put through.
I'll put the links in the description anyway, so those people who can't remember, they can look it up easily and access it, as well as your email, which will be fantastic. It's been a very interesting conversation going on from giants to little people holding up the internet for it, which actually they've done a marvelous job, by the way. So so I hope you will feed them.
I will. I'll leave them something later on.
Yeah, fantastic. Richard, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge of the esoteric and telling us about those blankets that need healing. I have to say, because my mind is a bit weird, sometimes people say things and I take it far too literally. And I almost burst out. I was holding myself back as you were talking about healing blankets. It did make me smile, so thank you for that, and I hope it did other people as well. But it's all very serious stuff, really. But I really appreciate that. PainGenie.com, Richard@PainGenie.com. Thank you so much for spending an hour with me and telling me about what you do. It's been really enjoyable.
Well, thank you for having me on, Richard.
It's my pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be back in due course, of course, with more wonderful monologues and more wonderful guests. Until then, from Richard in Ireland and myself here in Blighty, thanks for watching. Till next time, goodbye.